Appreciate it. There it goes. All right, recording in progress. Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. I would like to extend some apologies on Mitch's behalf. He was going to be facilitating with me, but unfortunately had a scheduling conflict. So he's very bummed that he couldn't join, as am I, but I will do my best to channel him because he's delightful. So this very wordy topic, Mitch and I met a handful of times prior to tonight's gathering to sort of shoot the breeze about change and ease, right? Very poetic, and identify things that were just sort of intriguing to us about the topic. And there was a lot of things. And we actually spent a fair amount of time at the outset just considering the topic as it was written, right? Cultivating an ease with changing course. It's a very curious thing. What does it mean? We weren't really sure, but it seemed to us, at least at minimum, that it was suggesting that an ease with change is important, like it's something worth, it's desirable and worth pursuing, and that we should be cultivating this skill or ability or sensibility. And so that was sort of our starting point, which inevitably led us to sharing stories and digging into those, which then led to more questions. So what I thought I would maybe try and do for at least the opening time frame of our roundtable is to share a few of the stories that we explored together, to identify the themes that stood out for us in these stories, and then what questions came from those. And then maybe if any of those questions sound interesting to us as a group, we can maybe use those as launch pads for a discussion. Does that sound okay to everyone? Is that an okay plan? Cool. And maybe so we don't have to remember everything all at once. I'll put all the questions in the chat box at the end of this, so they're there for us to refer to if we want to. So the first story is the story of the wormy and the lupin. And this has two parts. So I'll do the lupin part first. So my father was an ecologist who taught field biology and related subject matters in California. And more frequently than not, he taught outdoors in these sort of outdoor classroom settings. And so as a kid, maybe 11 years old or so, I remember several instances where I got to tag along with him, which was super cool. And so I had shared with Mitch the ways in which I witnessed my father teaching. And the dude was good. Like, he was articulate and funny. He had just a vast amount of knowledge and like really cool life experiences that he was able to tap into and share. And he was also on point in a really focused and robust way. So like as a student, you were never really at risk of him rattling on about things that were just completely disconnected. At the same time, during these same classroom outings, and amidst all of this focus, right, it was not uncommon for him to be taken unexpectedly by something that just fascinated him, which then took him and his students into this sort of sidebar story. So as an example, I'm telling Mitch about this time when I was on a walkabout with him and his students, and we're outdoors in the garden on campus. And he's talking, they're talking about local environmental policies, like that was the content of the class at the time. And he's gesticulating a lot and really getting into it. Apparently something I have adopted. I like talking with my hands. I will try to tame those. And then all of a sudden, like, he stops in his tracks and he points at something out behind this bush and he squeals. High-pitched squeal, like in delight, like, oh, look, it's a lupin, right? And a lupin's a type of wildflower. For those who don't know what a lupin is, that's what it is. And so then for the next 10 minutes, he invites everyone into the sheer joy of the lupin, right? About its characteristics, like, ooh, see how the petals do this? And look at this, the way that it interacts with the soil and all the flora around it. And like, he was a total kid in the candy store. It was apparent and infectious. And then, just like that, boom, steps back. He draws this magnificent parallel between the lupin and the environmental policy discussion they were originally on, like in just this way that brought everything together in one magnificent brushstroke. And it wasn't planned. It was just something that he did and was able to do as an instructor. It was rad. So that's part one of this story. In response, Mitch shares this story about the wormy. So this is an experience he had in the classroom a while back with some young students of his. And on inquiry was, I think, something about trash and taking care of the earth. Like that was their starting point. And then somewhere along the line, one of the kids decides, or maybe a group, they want to color. I should also mention the school that Mitch was teaching in and still is a very student-led school. So the kids decide they want to color. So Mitch busts out some coloring pages with worms on them. It picks up a book that has a story about worms and reads to them while they're coloring. And so there they are coloring away when one girl starts talking in this sort of goofy worm voice, holding up her picture and introducing her worm as like Mr. Wormy. And then she and others in the class all start talking with Mr. Wormy, which I don't know why that's my voice, and it feels like the worm should have a top hat for some reason, but Mr. Wormy. So in reflection, Mitch mentions to me that he recalled as a teacher sort of being in that middle space when this was happening, where he wasn't sure where things were going. And that the wormy improv might have seemed to have been a distraction from their original inquiry about, trash and taking care of the earth. But then one of the students expresses this view that we're all part of nature. And so the insight that humans are a part of the earth rather than on it kind of came out of nowhere. And it seemed to Mitch that the student's insight was really supported by this imaginative perspective taking of Mr. Wormy, right? And the space for playful engagement that really prepared the child for that insight. So that's the story of the wormy. So from here, Mitch and I start identifying some underlying sort of themes that we thought both of our stories were pointing to as it relates to our roundtable discussion tonight about ease and changing course. And so one of those was this idea of coherence, and another was this idea of our relationship with the unknown. And then some of the questions that arose from these were, one, is coherence a goal that we ought to be striving for in education or teaching, philosophy, and more? Two, what, if anything, does our relationship with the unknown have to do with our ease or dis-ease with changing course? And then three, what are some reasons we might find an ease with changing course challenging? And what are some things that we can do to address this? So that's the first story or set. Now I have one more, and I'll do this in a truncated form in interest of time. And this is nature wanderings. So Mitch and I then go on to talk about our mutual love of wandering and sort of following our feet where they take us. And so I bring up Wordsworth's, I go to nature to soothe my soul, or something like that. And then say something like, I don't often set out to the woods or nature with the question, what is the meaning of life? It's not that I don't think about such things. It's just that it's not typically a question I'm posing as a specific goal of my wanderings. I just want to explore. Nevertheless, it's frequently the case that these wanderings reveal insights about the meaning of life all on their own. So I share this story about how as a kid, I used to go on these adventures that would inevitably have me back hours after I had planned. For example, when I was still living near the ocean, I would set out on these morning walks along the beach with full intention to be back in 2 hours, only to return 6 or 7 hours later, which is ridiculous and terrifying to my mother, understandably. Mom, I'm sorry if you end up watching this, many apologies. But, the ocean water, the tide pools, the conversations between birds and rocks and sea lions, and the smell and feel of the ocean air, I was in. And it was also the case that in this inness, right, in this free flow wandering, I would always find myself stumbling on insights, really cool ones, precisely, I think, because of that free flow wandering. Had I had a schedule that I was committed to or some set path, I don't know. And so Mitch shared a similar experience about wandering. When he was in Japan, he was visiting Kyoto, and he took a bus up to this forested area north of the city near Kurama. And there was a path that was up to a shrine on this small mountain that most, I think, tourists would take. And he decided he was going to take a different path and meander elsewhere. So he's cruising along a road for a while until he comes across some other path, and he follows that for a ways. And then he's talking about the eagles and the stunning pines that are all around him, and how he would sit in a place in a while and then go off again. And so eventually he comes to the small seasonal pool. And as he approaches, he notices it's teeming with salamanders, like just filled with them. And he's seen salamanders before, but never a pool full. And he recalled in his telling of this to me, how delighted he was that he had not followed the shrine path, but had instead ventured out on his own. Had he not, he wouldn't have encountered the salamanders. And it was an experience that was impactful enough for him that before heading back to a starting point, he sat in the woods a while longer to just think and to be taken in by the unanticipated discoveries. So after sharing those two stories about wanderings, we did that step again of trying to identify more common themes and came across two relevant to our conversation tonight, and came across two. The first was to veer or not to veer, right? To stay on course or not. And the other, maybe more fundamental inquiry is sort of the idea of the path or course itself. So 3 questions, and then I'll zip my trap, that came from this are, what do we mean by the course, right? Certainly not all classes or courses have the same objectives. So what are we actually doing? What exactly are we doing in a particular course of study? And how does our staying on course or changing course relate to these objectives? 2, how do we arrive upon insights? Is wandering or changing course necessary for certain kinds of insights about the world to come about? And if so, how should we think about this relative to the classroom? And then finally, if cultivating an ease is with changing course is something that is worth pursuing, is it something we should be doing at all times? Or are there actually scenarios where staying the course is more desirable? So those are kind of the things that we were contemplating and playing with and thought might be interesting for us to explore as a group. But they need not be the ones that we explore, right? 'Tis the nature of the roundtable. So maybe I'll throw those questions at least in the chat box, and then we can go from there. Is that cool? Okay. All right, I'm throwing them in, making sure they get in. Copy, maybe here, paste.